Well, welcome back. We have some breaking news for you now. We are learning that some brand new charges have just been filed against cult mom Lori Vallow-Daybell. We want to bring in now Court TV special contributor Ashley Banfield, who's been speaking with detectives to get the very latest. Ashley, good evening.
Julie, so I've been working the phones all day, and literally in the last few seconds, I'm actually still reading some of my sources' information. I can confirm for you this. Lori Vallow has now officially been charged with 2 counts of conspiracy to commit destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence. I'm also told that this comes as a result of a conspiracy with Chad Daybell and Alex Cox. So this is a fascinating new development in this case, because if you think about the fact that they've come to these extra charges for Lori through a conspiracy with Chad and Alex, that certainly does open the door down the road for far more serious charges, like potentially murder, because conspiracy is something that can bring a whole lot of people in, like the spokes on a bicycle wheel, into the center of an action. And we know those 2 little kids didn't die of natural causes and bury themselves. So without question, this is a very significant development. Lori Vallow has now officially been charged with conspiracy to commit destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence, 2 counts. And my source is telling me that we can expect the same thing for Chad tomorrow. Here's what I do want to say, Julie, and you'll understand this as a prosecutor who gets how this works. You don't just go flying off and charging people, because the minute you charge someone, the clock starts ticking. And you have to have your ducks in a row, because we have a constitutional right to speedy trial, right? So if you charge somebody and you're not ready, and they decide to elect a speedy trial and you're not ready, you're a mess. That's not what they want for this case. If they're going to go ahead with the murder charges, they want everything ready to go, which means the investigation continues, which also means that's why you saw investigators executing yet another warrant at Chad Daybell's property today. I'll also tell you this, Julie, they not only went into Chad Daybell's home, children answered the door, they had their paperwork, inside they went, but they also went into 2 other buildings on that property. They went into the shed and they went into the barn. And I also know specifically they knew what they were looking for. They went in with a specific intent to find a couple of things in particular. And so that tells you that they are trying to solidify every little piece of detail in order to go further with far more serious charges. Here's something else, Julie, that I know that you will understand as a prosecutor. What Lori Vallow has been sitting pretty in jail on are abandonment charges, right? Child abandonment charges. And she was told, produce the children, which she didn't do. But somebody else produced those children. The police produced the children. They dug the children up. And so now, if you do the math on this, those charges don't really pertain any longer to Lori Vallow. It's not a case of abandoning those kids now, because we know where those children are. So this is a very critical move on the part of the investigators, the part of the prosecutors in this case, in this very, very wide-reaching, multi-state, multi-jurisdictional, federal and state level case. Get her on other charges so that they can continue the good work of what those police officers are doing, and that is building the more serious case against all 3 of them, not just Lori, also Chad, and the involvement of dead Uncle Alex. And I don't need to remind our viewers what dead Uncle Alex was reported to have done in the wee hours between the last time Tylee was seen alive and the last time JJ was seen alive, and the next day, at which point his cell phone found him pinging over both of their graves. 2 different dates, 2 different crimes, 2 different murders, likely 2 different sets of charges. And I dare say, again, Julie, I know you know this because you're a prosecutor, that would mean if you get 2 guilty verdicts, you get sentences that are not concurrent, they're consecutive. So that's sort of the latest breakdown in how today played out and what these investigators have been doing. But if you missed it, 2 counts for Lori Vallow: conspiracy to commit destruction, alteration, or concealment of evidence, and sit pretty because you're likely to see that repeated tomorrow with Chad. Same charges.
Wow, Ashley, this is huge. This is huge. And so much, you gave us so much information here, so much to unpack and go through. But first off, I want to touch on that really critical point you made about the charges she's being held on right now. If we take a step back, so many people looking at this case, eyes on it all over the country, and we know that there's this death investigation going on. But abandonment, right? That's what's holding her, the desertion of the kids, abandoning the kids, contempt of court, all that. But now you're right, it was the police who produced her children.
Right.
So that has to go away. So to your point, these investigators have been working around the clock to get their ducks in a row. It seems like, tell me, Ashley, in your opinion, these charges today seem to be one step closer to possibly the homicide charges that we think may be ultimately coming.
Well, listen, I mean, this is the first time I've heard Alex Cox as part of a conspiracy with Lori and Chad. So now that they're actually using those words, and listen, I don't have all the details yet. I don't have all the details of what's in this affidavit and this charging document, but that's coming, and hopefully soon. If not tonight, probably tomorrow morning. But we'll start to find out. But what I am told is that a lot of the details are the same as in the last affidavit, that walloping affidavit that we got 2 Fridays ago, that just sort of sat me back in my chair and made me catch my breath, just because the details were so disturbing and so unbelievable. And listen, I've covered so many murders in my 3 decades, but I just can't believe the details that I read in that affidavit, that Uncle Alex, in the middle of the night, was over at Lori Vallow's apartment, and lo and behold, the next morning he's over at Chad's, and that's the last time we ever see Tylee. But he was in the middle of the night at Lori's apartment for about an hour or two, and then the next morning over at Chad's, and then the same thing plays out with little JJ about 2 weeks later. There's Uncle Alex carrying what looks like a sleeping JJ, but I dare say I'm now starting to wonder if that was a drugged or dead JJ passing through the last witnesses that ever saw him alive, and then lo and behold, the next morning, he's standing on the gravesite, or at least his cell phone is standing on the gravesite of J.J. Vallow. So we have this skulking, horrifying, monstrous character in dead Uncle Alex. And I'm not libeling this dead man. These are the facts. This skulking, horrible character in Alex Cox, Lori's brother. And now you have police saying conspiracy, at least in these latest charges, conspiracy to commit destruction, alteration, or concealment of the evidence. But wow, that's pretty strong language, and you hear conspiracy between characters like these.
Oh, most definitely, Ashley. And we've been talking about legal theories in this case, piecing together the facts, the evidence that we know thus far. And certainly we've all been theorizing about Alex Cox possibly being the family hitman, so to speak. And now we know at the very least he's a co-conspirator. He's dead, but still a co-conspirator at the time, according to these authorities. So this is huge. I expect much more in the next affidavit coming from them. And I mean, did it surprise you at all? You've done so much thorough reporting, research, digging on this case from the outset. But did it surprise you today when you saw the news of them going back to that property again, the Daybell property that's been searched now 3 times? What did you think when you heard? Tell me why, please.
I kind of expected it, actually.
Did you?
I fully expected it, because once you unearth remains and all of that forensic material that comes along with those remains, well, all of a sudden the game has changed, right? And now I think you're starting to look for some of the things that might match those remains. I mean, listen, this is what I've seen play out, time after time after time. Idiot criminals that think they can beat the system. They think they're smarter than the system because they watch TV or they've watched an episode of CSI. But the truth is, you bury along with your victim trace amounts of you, no matter how good you are. And so my expectation was, once they had a chance to look at these bodies, the condition they were in, deplorable, given the fact that JJ was underground for the entire fall, winter, and most of the spring, and Tylee had been reduced to pieces of remains that were charred, but there was still some things there. So I think there could have been some forensic clues and details that would have led them to say, hey, we need to go look for evidence X, Y, and Z and see if there's any of that in that shed or that barn. So no, I'm not surprised in the least that they have executed that warrant, and I expect that there will probably be more.
Probably. They are certainly not done. And I have to hand it to all these investigators. They're very, very thorough, always 2 steps ahead of where we think
They're not
they
sleeping
might
much. I
be.
will tell you that, Julie. They're not sleeping a lot, and
No.
they're sort of operating in quorum, from what I
Mm.
understand. Just groups of them, much like these our news teams gather on a regular basis, just knocking their heads together and going further and further afield to find, to test theories and to look really deeply at the evidence with a really open mind. So they're working very hard at it. And can I tell you this? Not just the ones in Idaho. I'm talking about the ones in Chandler. I'm talking about the ones everywhere in Hawaii. They are all in concert. They've had a full on meeting together in Salt Lake, and they are in regular concert conversation with one another on all the different varying aspects and players in this case, because some things just seem to be awfully similar, like mysteriously healthy people just dying and it being, natural causes, or at least looking that way. And so I find it just sort of a really fascinating murder case, more fascinating than perhaps any of the ones that I've covered, in my life, because there's so many jurisdictions and because there's so many dead people and because there are so many two attempted murders in this case, and so many jurisdictions, and then of course children.
Absolutely, those children. And Ashley, I'm going to look forward to talking with you more at the top of the hour about those kids. You did a big interview today with death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan to
Yes.
talk about what may come from these autopsies. We will
Can
see
I give you a hint?
Yes, please, please.
Yeah. So here's this. I think 2 weeks ago, we all got together and we talked about, well, gosh, that all we know about these remains is that they were egregiously concealed. What could that mean? And we started asking questions of forensics experts. Well, what could that mean? There's a fire pit nearby. And we theorized that potentially somebody tried to reduce those remains by fire. And then we learned from our very smart investigators that takes a very long time. And usually dumb criminals, quit, not knowing how long it takes. And lo and behold, the affidavit came out and we learned that's exactly what is likely to have happened, right?
Wow.
She wasn't fully burned. She was buried. They couldn't get rid of all of Tylee. So now we've got the same little thing going ahead with the plastic bag that was found around JJ's head. There is a lot to that, Julie. There is a lot that could mean, Julie. That there's a lot of clues that gives us, and you're going to hear about that at 9.
The story those remains will tell. Ashley
Yeah.
Banfield, thank you.